I like to use the metaphor of mountain climbing, which is like you've got the vision, you can see from afar the top of the mountain. You don't know how the hell you're going to get there, and you might traverse a trail and then find you're at a cliff's edge and you got to go back down, or you might actually fall off the cliff and have hopefully not die, but like come really close to dying and then like kind of find your way back up. But you know what the mountaintop looks like and it motivates you to continue to get there. Our journey has definitely been like climbing a mountain. We're nowhere near the top right now. We have been incredibly consistent in terms of our vision of building a protocol layer for dollars on the internet.
Hi, everybody. This is Benedict, your host of REWIRED, a new podcast series by Obligate, where we talk about the future of capital markets and the role blockchain technology plays in it. I'm in Zurich at Trust Square with this beautiful view, and who've been so kind as to host us. And we have a very exciting guest joining us today. It's Jeremy Allaire, founder and CEO of Circle, the company behind USDC, the world's largest regulated stablecoin, standing tall at a $33 billion US dollar market cap as per today. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Benedict. I'm really pleased to have this conversation and opportunity to join you guys.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really a pleasure having you. So today I want to talk to you about the future of capital markets, particularly also debt capital markets more broadly, what role stablecoins will play in that. First off, I want to start, however, with a personal question. You've been working on Circle now for more than 10 years. What is it that drives you? Why do you build what you're building with Circle? And how do you measure the success of your mission?
Thank you for the great question. I would say just sort of stepping back, really for the past now over 30 years, I've been, have kind of committed my talents to, really trying to build up a more connected world that is built on open networks, i.e. the internet. And everything that has inspired me has been really driven by this idea that we can really change how society, the economy, information, all these things can work by building on this open global network. And there are a lot of fundamental principles that have informed different products that I've worked on over time, but I kind of keep coming back to what I think of as like the internet's DNA, and which is open source, open networks, decentralized distributed computing, models, and permissionless access and innovation. These were really at the heart of the internet from pre-1990, but very much, I think, still critical today. And in a world as complex as ours, I think having a kind of shared substrate like this that the entire world can kind of build on and get network effects from and so on is really extraordinary and really powerful. And it's played itself out in so many ways that have been largely, I believe, very, very positive for the world. And what drew me to the mission specifically around Circle is really building on that. And specifically, this idea, which I really got fired up about, almost 12 years ago now, which was this idea that we could actually change how money was expressed and used to be more like the way information and data work on the internet. And that we could bring that DNA of the internet into money, and we could actually construct an internet-based financial system. And that it could ultimately lead to a safer, fairer, more inclusive, more efficient economic system. And that I sort of have looked very, very deeply at kind of the nature of capital, the nature of capital markets, the nature of money, and how all these things work, and how this intersects with this particular technology opportunity, which has kind of emerged around us. And fundamentally, the mission of the company, we've been very consistent about the mission, which is to raise global economic prosperity through the frictionless exchange of value. That is our stated mission. And And I genuinely believe that if we can build an internet financial system that are built up on these principles, it will actually grow economic opportunity for people in the world. It'll grow economic output of the world. And that's a powerful thing. That's one of the biggest things we can do to help raise people out of poverty and improve people's lot in life and create new technology innovation, entrepreneurship, all these things that come from the economic system. And so I genuinely believe that in the coming decades, and this is what I believe when I founded Circle, that in the coming decades, that we're building up a new infrastructure layer on the internet, which is for our economic infrastructure. I believe it'll also be used in our political infrastructure and social infrastructure and many other places. And blockchains we could talk about generically, but I really believe this, building up this capability and building up a new economic infrastructure and this concept of the exchange of value. When people hear me say the frictionless exchange of value, they naturally think, oh, you're talking about payments. You're talking about how money moves. That is definitely true. But at the heart of this is a belief that the movement of money, the storage of money, and the movement of money are going to be completely commoditized in the same way that the movement and storage of information have been completely commoditized. And it's actually through the programmability of money, it's actually through the expression of contracts that you can actually intermediate value exchange in really, really powerful ways, which I think will touch on some of the themes of this discussion, right? You can intermediate, value exchange in ways that really stimulate economic output, which is through credit, and through mechanisms like this. And so that's the big picture, like what motivates me, what our mission is, what we believe, why we're working on this, and kind of what brings me to my work every day.
That's awesome. No, I mean, it's so exciting also to see, as you often talk about, the kind of digital dollar economy and the ecosystem that, amongst others, USDC have spawned with people around the globe, hundreds of startups building on top of that. It's certainly become like a key piece of architecture in what we're building at Obligate. And I think it's really kind of inescapable for everybody who interacts with the Web3 world today. But obviously, the vision is much broader. And the more we go into emerging markets, then, we see things where the adoption of, digital or blockchain-based payment systems are much further than, in some like Western European countries.
I mean, think about like what happened with mobile and messaging and other things, like where that growth came from.
Exactly.
There's all these people who had the greatest need, to get fast, efficient communications that worked internationally. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's an extremely exciting piece to see. But something I was curious about also, I kind of look back in history and drew a comparison to PayPal, where the founding vision of PayPal in the late 90s was like super disruptive, centered on the creation of kind of a new government independent world currency. And today it is something very different. It's very successful, but much more adapted. In this kind of journey over the past, 10 plus years or even longer, did you guys at Circle make a similar evolution in terms of, the founding idea and where it is today? Or is it just, some of the obviously normal back and forths and, swimming in the river that happened?
Yeah, I like to use the metaphor of mountain climbing, which is like you've got the vision, you can see from afar the top of the mountain. You don't know how the hell you're going to get there, and you might traverse a trail and then find you're at a cliff's edge and you got to go back down, or you might actually fall off the cliff and have hopefully not die, but like come really close to dying, and then like kind of find your way back up. But you know what the mountaintop looks like, and it motivates you to continue to get there. And so our journey has definitely been like climbing a mountain. And we're nowhere near the top. Like we're nowhere near the top right now. But what I'd say in direct response to your question is we have been incredibly consistent in terms of our vision of building a protocol layer for dollars on the internet, on building it on public chain infrastructure so that it's open and permissionless and can be built on, and a belief that would eventually usher in kind of the programmability of money. And it has. I mean, the past 5 years of what's happened in DeFi is extraordinary, because that is actually programmable money at work in a very powerful way. But we're really still the very beginning stages of programmable money. but that has been consistent. Now, we've built a lot of different products along the way. We've gotten into different lines of business. We've bought businesses, we've sold businesses, we've shuttered businesses, but we've kind of stayed on this fundamental mission. And really, for the past 6 years, when USDC actually became possible from both a technical and a legal and a regulatory perspective, we were actually able to bring this to the world. Like, we've just been every year, like, deepening and deepening what we're trying to do and building this up, because it really is that founding vision, and we're just expressing it and realizing it, more than ever. And I often say, recently, we went through our 10-year anniversary. We're now in our 11th year. I've sort of said multiple times, like, we're kind of just now getting to the 1.0 vision. And so, great companies, I think they have multi-decade visions. And I think we're a decade in, we're kind of just getting to the 1.0 vision coming to life, which is super exciting. It's become meaningful. It's become a good business. There's a whole ecosystem that's been out. It's an established platform. But I think all the really super exciting stuff is yet to come.
Absolutely. I think I see it the same way. It's amazing to see also just this journey over the years. And I think, I started using USDC a few years ago also for like payments between friends, etc. Or participating maybe in a fund using USDC. When I saw these coming around, I realized, it's going much broader and broader. And I think that's also like what drew me originally into the space, was this potential behind the programmability of money, of assets, and then a convergence, because I'm a lawyer by training, of an economic contract with a legal contract. And also, the challenges, but also the potential that lays bare for the legal world, which is extremely based around very national silos. We only see at the kind of the top of capital markets, with the top players, that really have an international financial system and able to really leverage the technology, lower transaction costs. I think that's what's really so exciting, and something that I've been, very super excited seeing in DeFi. I think that was always also kind of an inspiration. But we knew the way DeFi worked, kind of moving in an extra legal territory. Sometimes they think it does, while it doesn't. The true impact, I think, is there when we now leverage this technology and bring it to the large existing financial markets in the regulated legal world. And that's what we're doing, at Obligate, working on bringing kind of debt capital markets on chain. At the KeyRock Circle event at ECC Brussels, you also mentioned that you're very excited about the prospect of on-chain debt capital markets. I wanted to ask, what about this use case, among all these different use cases, where there's, a lot of opportunity, hype around. What about this use case makes you bullish regarding its potential for adoption?
Coming back to my mission statement, right? Economic growth is very much built on an efficient way for markets to deal with the time value of money. And basically the fundamental problem is that there's people who have capital, dollars or whatever you want, that there's people who have capital that don't need it at any given time. And then there's people who have the need for capital, but don't actually have the capital. And they have the ability to undertake economic activity, hopefully that is net productive and generates net new economic value, such that, they can repay their debt, right? But fundamentally, credit money is so fundamental to the way the real economy works. Credit money is so significant for, again, that time value of money transformation. And when I think about how do we build an internet financial system, I sort of think of it in a couple of really important parts. And this is overly simplistic, but one part is you need a base layer of money, which is a fully reserved cash-like instrument that has kind of inherits the physics of the internet. And here we're really talking about the capacities of what blockchains do, right? So transmission at the speed of the internet, settlement finality at the speed of the internet, the efficiency of moving data. So the cost of transmission approaching zero, like this super, super efficient money. And the second is that's like this safe underlying unit that everyone can feel comfortable with as like this base layer of money on the internet. And with blockchains, right, we now have a medium of exchange where you can it's trustless, right? Meaning you can have settlement finality to any digital device, any piece of software, any piece of hardware, any end entity. You can have that settlement finality in a trustless way, which is also extraordinary and allows for commercial and financial relationships to be internet scale, which has been hard to do. And then finally, really what you ultimately want to do is you want to be able to enable markets for credit, debt markets, right? Markets for credit to function on this infrastructure. I'm a big believer in internet platforms and internet markets are able to serve what's called the long tail. I talked about this in the interview in Zurich, right? And Chris Anderson famously wrote the article "The Long Tail" for Wired magazine. He was editor in chief back in the early 2000s, I believe, and it basically said, "Hey, internet platforms can match, kind of buyers and sellers in a market in a far more efficient way than legacy markets." And so you have, AdWords is the most efficient advertising system in the world because it can go to the long tail. Like I might be, a tennis instructor in this neighborhood of this, the city of Cincinnati, Ohio, and I can find someone who needs tennis instruction by placing a highly specific auction-based advertisement there. So you're able to service these massively global reach markets in a hyper efficient way. And, if we move on chain and we move value storage on chain and we move payment flows on chain, you actually start building up the basis for making risk decisions based on-chain data. We can build on infrastructure like zero knowledge proofs to kind of have good proofs that are useful to, a risk underwriter, useful to a smart contract that's underwriting risk. We have these capabilities to eventually have a hyper efficient model of underwriting risk on chain. And that, I believe, will lead to very hyper efficient global scale credit and debt markets that look more like AdWords and, or eBay or YouTube or, you pick the multi-sided platform that exists on the internet that achieves that scale. So I just believe it's a very big opportunity. And I think it's aligned with this mission of how do we improve value exchange in the world? Because the exchange of value is also the exchange of value over time, which is debt. And so that's like the basic philosophy behind it and why I'm so interested in it. And I think that is ultimately should lead to a safer financial system, which is a big motivator. How do we provide more transparency, more safety, more auditability, and how do we improve the safety of how these credit mechanisms work in the world? Because we've dealt with credit mechanisms that are opaque. Regulators don't understand them. The banks themselves don't even understand the kind of risk that's embedded in their own capital stack and balance sheet. And so how do we reduce risk, improve efficiency, improve reach, and how does this look more like the internet than legacy markets?
I think that's super exciting and very interesting to hear from your perspective, also in this very bigger picture. And in the end, we started doing what we're doing at Obligate because we're convinced of the massive potential behind using blockchain technology, particularly combining regulated stablecoins like USDC and with the title side of a security instrument, like any kind of debt instrument, whether it's secured, unsecured. And but the reason why we do this, obviously, is so we want to lower transaction costs because we are convinced, like a functioning capitalist financial system or functioning debt-based financial system is possible. But then we go into, let's say, some emerging markets, and you realize none of it is working. Like neither the people have access to investing. So those who would, be able to lend into an economy, the companies don't have access to borrow capital. But even then in more developed markets, like here in Switzerland, you see the borrowing side or the corporate finance side of the banks is often completely disconnected to the wealth management and private banking side. Mm-hmm. And this is something where, with technology, I think we can really also break down barriers to some extent. And also challenge some of these clear boundaries, right? I'm a lawyer by training. I'm not a finance expert, but so I come into this industry and there's very clear demarcation lines. These are public markets, these are private markets. This is trading, this is post-trading. And while we often talk, we want to enable blockchain-based capital markets, technically a lot of the issuance that we have, they're not traditional capital markets. These are, private credit issuance. Some of them, many of them are short-term.
Totally.
But we use these terminology because we believe the nature of what constitutes a public market transaction or a private market transaction will change. I think we will see a dissolution between these lines. And we already see that. And I was curious how you see that development and maybe where do you see the fastest, adoption and which segment of the broader credit landscape?
It's a great kind of way to frame it, right? And sort of the concept of a public market versus a private market, right, has often been demarcated in part by kind of the readiness of the infrastructure of a private market participant versus what is required to be a public market participant as an issuer, et cetera. The risk management expectations around investor protection and other things, these regimes that we have around disclosure, or these regimes that we have around protecting from abuse and market manipulation, fraud, all this stuff. Like we have all these rules that are there for a good reason, because unencumbered, right? People will defraud people will steal from people will manipulate markets. Like and we've seen that frankly, in crypto capital markets, you've seen, lots of offshore platforms where, and other, kinds of platforms that have abuses that a traditional, say, markets regulator finds extremely problematic, right? And so, one view is like, well, this will self-correct and self-regulate, and it will get better and better because the incentives are aligned for this to be more and more effective. And it's a little bit like kind of how a lot of other internet utilities evolved without becoming heavily regulated, whereas their predecessor, whether it's communications utilities or media platforms or other things, had been more highly regulated. So I think the answer probably lies somewhere in between, which is to say we actually have to write down rules that are relatively consistent globally, that kind of get adopted around the ability to have a digital token that represents a investment interest and have a disclosure model that is a fair disclosure model, to have, frankly, kind of financial contract law updated to contemplate this broadly as well, but acknowledges the fact that the market infrastructure for, kind of how suppliers and borrowers meet each other is much more open and accessible and global. And allows for participation by any eligible adult, really. And I think like I use a couple of analogies to think about this, and of course every analogy isn't perfect, but if 20 years ago you had said, what, you're gonna basically take out your phone and you're gonna like call up a random stranger's car, and you're going to get in the random stranger's car and they're going to drive you around, and you're going to be comfortable with that. Like hitchhiking is now like going to be automated, and you're going to do that. People would be like, look at you like you're an alien. Or if you're like, you own an apartment or whatever, or a house, and you're going to let this like random strangers kind of come and crash in your place for a day or two or a week, and like that's going to be like a new source of income for you, you'd be like, that's totally crazy. And if you play out a lot of the things that the internet has done, at their core is the internet has found ways to do kind of effectively risk scoring, reputation management, You have internet platforms that have built really robust kind of trust and safety models around them. And yes, bad things happen. But like society basically says, you know what, this is so this new utility of like frictionless transportation or traveling and living in multiple ways, or, the fact that I can communicate and share, to anyone, anywhere. Yes, there are bad actors that will use and abuse these things, but these sort of platforms have built these mechanisms. And I think about, when I think about, say, on-chain debt markets, et cetera, I really think it's incumbent on the innovators such as yourselves to really think about, actually, how can we improve transparency, risk visibility, auditability? How can we improve disclosure? How can we do this better so that, ultimately when market rules do get written, which they will, they can reflect and adopt to this new utility value, as opposed to kind of looking back on how the old system worked. I am always a half glass full guy. Like I genuinely am I'm genuinely looking for the opportunities to fix things, to improve things, to do better, even when, things maybe look really challenging.
Thank you very much for that. Maybe just going a bit further on this. So something that we've experienced ourselves, moving in a regulated space. Our mission, I think, is measured. Are we able to enable new transactions, lower transaction costs, and make these transactions more efficient? And what we've seen, obviously, basically every tier one financial institution around the world has probably had several blockchain pilots so far. And I think a lot of that is very good intentions behind that. But the way they end up oftentimes, is then obviously they don't have the cash side or the cash leg on chain. They do fiat settlements off chain. And they look around and they're like, okay, let's use this blockchain technology. And
right.
However, there's still, maybe the same intermediaries that sit around the table today are there. And then they look at each other like, hey, this is actually not more efficient. So why should we even do it? And that is something where obviously, we're not DeFi. We want to play in this regulated world. But we want to also still be disruptive, because again, we want to be measured by, are we able to lower transaction costs? And I wanted to ask you, how do you balance that on the one hand, wanting to make things more efficient, being disruptive, but at the same time also understanding you will have the biggest impact if you work with a big player, it's the incumbents. And, Circle has partnerships spanning from BlackRock all over to Western Union. I found it extremely impressive, but I would love to hear your kind of approach to that.
I think it's very important to hold firm to, only executing the products that are really building on the new possibilities of an on-chain world, on a public blockchain world, on a stablecoin world. Really, really holding true to those, because they are superior, like fundamentally, kind of the physics of it, the technology, what it can do. It is fundamentally superior. And I think, we've tried to work with, policymakers and regulators and banks and others, like all along the way, to say, we can do this safely. We can do this compliantly. We have ways to do that. And so as we start getting into securitization, or we start getting into things like tokenized assets and other forms of instruments, I think it's really key to, bring people along. And, the fact that, like, in Europe, as you're aware, like MiCA is here, and now things like EURC and USDC are legal electronic money. They can be used in capital markets transactions. The number of traditional financial institutions who are like, oh, I can now use this. I can now feel comfortable settling something over a public chain. Like the cash settlement layer can be done this way. Oh, I now can feel comfortable that I can hold this as a form of collateral because I know what it is legally, and I know how I'm protected as a financial intermediary. I know how it's supervised. I know what this is. So as those things unfold, then the ability to start bringing this into other types of financial contracts, other types of financial arrangement really improves and really grows. And then people say, oh, okay, if I want to do this and issue some kind of, tokenized asset, okay, I know I need to deal with crypto asset service providers, or I need to be a crypto asset service provider. There's a way to do this. Like the things we're moving the ball down the field, right? And you got to stick to the model and not kind of try and kind of be an overlay on the legacy system. So I think that's just really key. And so that for like startups, right? I think that oftentimes is, finding markets that have not been well served, right? I think, you start out with the markets that have not been well served, and you do a 10x better job for them. And if you start with like the giant markets that are already super well served by a giant edifice superstructure that's there, and you're trying to win those over, you're not going to do it, right? I use the example with AdWords, again, just thinking about the internet, right? Like Google went after like small businesses that just found it hard to like advertise, and merchants that were like really trying to like get traffic to their sites, and e-commerce was still pretty small. The number of merchants doing that was still pretty small. It wasn't General Motors advertising for their cars, right? It was this sort of the people who were not well served who said, wow, this lets me do something I couldn't do before. But then eventually General Motors has got like the biggest ad budget on Google in the world, right? Because they eventually found it to be a better system for reaching their audience. And so, over time, right, the biggest asset issuers, the biggest investment houses, the biggest, all the biggest will see, oh, this is ultimately a better system. But you got to, especially if you want to stay true to the technology, to the architecture, to the openness and these benefits, I think you have to focus on those markets that are not well served. It's really easy to get a meeting with a big brand and a big company and for a big committee in a meeting room and people to be like, oh yeah, I'm talking about this, but like getting anything done is really, really hard, really, really hard. But if you go with someone smaller who's got a real need, they can actually make decisions. They're willing to take risks that other people aren't willing to take. You obviously have to do things within the law. So like, legal clarity and regulatory clarity is helping with that. But, that would be my high level thoughts on that.
That's awesome. No, I think that's so interesting to see. Obviously, I mean, with PayPal, it was similar, right? Like the eBay power users as kind of these first adopters, and then you go one by one. And I think we've seen a similar evolution with what we're doing. The companies starting to do these blockchain-based debt issuances. A lot of them didn't actually come from Web3. They're like TradFi players, and especially from underserved markets. And the importance is like trying to obviously strike a balance between you want to have someone who is, has good value collateral assets, who's not like junk.
Of course, you want good assets.
Exactly, you want good assets. But there are a lot of market distortions that we see, right? Especially when it comes to banking regulation. We've seen the original RWA, the risk weighing of assets, putting a strain on, for example, the commodities trading space. And so these were some of our early adopters, really amazing companies with a huge track record, but are just saying, hey, banks don't really care about us anymore as much because we're just in this too low of a segment. Or others where the economies of scale just play heavily into it, right? Where we say a traditional bond issuance, you can do it if it's just an issuance amount of 10 million, but the transaction cost, because everybody has their minimum fee, is going to end up, north of 200 basis points all in. And these are the elements where we see a lot of adoption. But once they come and you see, these respectable companies start using it, then one by one, we get now more attention from the bigger players. And I know you are short on time, but I wanted to ask you a follow-up question on this particular one. And I think when it comes to adoption, right, we all want to find these 10x moments. And I think on the origination side, for example, we definitely have that. We can make the issuance of blockchain of credit, X times faster, much cheaper, with a great user experience. But the overall RWA space so far, I think, has struggled to create that 10x moment on the investor side, on the liquidity provider side, unless there's some niches, right? And we would talk about accessibility of assets in USDC now in emerging markets at much lower ticket sizes, etc. So that works. But I think it's not enough to get really like the large adoption going. And something that we've seen, a big trend, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. A lot of the recent, use cases that have been kind of coined a killer app for RWA or DeFi, such as bringing treasury bills on chain or tokenizing private equity funds, etc. There's a big distinction between those that, let's say, they take an traditional asset, a TradFi asset, which was originated on TradFi rails, and then they put it into SPVs and enable access to it in the form of a token. While that does create value for a certain segment, if let's say you're a DeFi investor, you don't want to go off chain, you don't want to invest too much to get into. But at the same time, in our opinion, it doesn't really leverage the full potential of blockchain technology the way, for example, Figure HELOC issuance, which is fully native, or the stuff that we do, which is also fully native, does. So I wanted to get your opinion on this kind of tokenizing of existing assets, or like really going all the full native issuance way.
As like a long-term internet guy, I like to think about how these evolve, right? When online video became possible, I was like an online video before I was in it was one of the industries I was in. When online video first came out, like the biggest creators of content, like the movie studios, the television networks, right? They weren't putting their shows online, right? They might put a promotion for a show online, and then they might even have on their website like a whole gallery of promotions for their site. And then you had basically like self-service platforms like YouTube, which basically said, hey, anybody can create content and put that online. And you actually saw a completely new category of content emerge, which was user-generated content. And it exploded. And then there was sort of this intersection between kind of like, traditionally issued content, meaning like a studio originated content, and online. And you started to see, eventually you started to see the creators of content say, no, I'm going to originate my content online entirely and be fully digital. Right. And that was the Netflix studio. And now like that's like across the board, like more and more of this content is just straight to the internet, right? As opposed to the legacy distribution platforms. And so I think of a similar kind of evolution. And in some ways, like DeFi is like YouTube, right? Meaning like anybody can show up with USDC, and they can, take that USDC and they can go and they can look at a on-chain protocol, which is a self-running machine, and they can obviously try and evaluate the quality of the assets that are backing the loans and the liquidation methodologies and so on. And some of these build up by reputation. Take an Aave as like a really large one, and you have like a self-service credit market that is collateralized, and you're sort of seeing these kinds of things emerge again organically. But then the traditional issuers are like, well, I'll do something like you described. Like I'll create this new SPV vehicle and I'll kind of dabble into this, but it's not kind of giving people like the whole enchilada. And so ultimately, I believe like fully native, entirely native to on-chain is the way to go. I also believe, and over the long run, and this gets into a little bit of the topic earlier in the conversation, like, if I'm a private credit investor, right, I believe in the future, every person on planet Earth is going to be a private credit investor. I think every single person, and they won't even know it. They're going to have a wallet, and they're going to basically say, I want to take some of my stablecoin and I want to allocate it to savings. And like that is then going to go into a whole set of protocols that are going to be risk managed and are going to enable people to access what is effectively private credit instruments. And those private credit instruments are going to be, the borrowers are entirely borrowing in on-chain stablecoins, and they're actually deploying their working capital and their transactions using stablecoins. And the whole system is running in that way. And so private credit, the decision, like I, as like an individual who's, say I'm sitting in I'm sitting in Vietnam, and like I want to save and I want to get a reasonable return, like they will be able to do that on top of this very native on-chain infrastructure. And, both lenders and borrowers will be executing their entire transaction flows in stablecoins. And so what is a bond issuance, like we think of, or a private credit instrument, right? These are notes, they're bonds, they're other things. These notes and bonds are just going to be these on-chain tokenized instruments. We need the legal framework for enforceability, right? As you know.
Absolutely.
So anyway, that's what I sort of see in happening over time. And it's very similar to this sort of evolution of kind of the internet nativeness of different kind of markets that came online as well.
think it's an extremely compelling and fascinating vision. I think the more assets will be able to be reflected on chain, because right now, the amount of assets corporates or private individuals can actually reflect when they want to get banking services is minimal, right? If you look, like a Lombard loan or something, like the amount of assets, and then we saw DeFi kind of disrupting that. And if we can bring that to the legacy system, the more assets can be reflected. I think, with abundance of data available, we're going to see much more efficient credit markets across the globe, which is extremely exciting.
Absolutely.
And that leads me to my final question, and that is, so I checked the volume of USDC trading today. It was very high, right? It's like, by the time I checked, it was like 23 billion. It's probably more than that by now, which is, like almost 3/4 of the market cap of USDC. So USDC today still is used a lot for trading and crypto investing. And you've talked a lot about, Web3 coming into the utility stage of the technology and blockchain technology. And something fascinating I recently saw in a report about the stablecoin adoption in Africa, making a distinction between Nigeria, where people use it to actually just, be protected from inflation, whereas in a place like South Africa, they use it to speculate and invest.
Right.
Do you actively nudge, for example, your users to use USDC also more for payments? Is that something you want to focus more efforts on as Circle and USDC?
Absolutely. So we've seen just over the past few years, and it's growing more and more what I'll call cross-border payments, international payments, and store of value demand for USDC. We've absolutely seen that grow. And we've started to see localized P2P markets where basically people are, like you said, you're paying with your friends, right? In certain markets, we're seeing sort of localized P2P markets. And we're seeing SME payments more and more. SMEs that are internationally conducting international transactions, because the supply chains are global, whether you're a small business, medium-sized business, global business. And SMEs are moving faster because they frankly can make decisions more easily. They're willing to try new technologies earlier than very large corporations in many cases. And so we're seeing lots of really exciting indicators. I cannot tell you the number of startups that we're seeing in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Middle East, other places who are building apps and services that are very specifically targeting both the kind of the P2P, international, and store of value use cases for stablecoins. It's unbelievable. There's so many, and B2B, B2C, all these. So we're seeing it all over the place. We are absolutely nudging it. We've got developer programs, we've got marketing activations, we got key partnerships to make sure that USDC is liquid and available in all these places globally as well. So we're definitely doing a lot. And the number of the number that you cited from the last 24 hours of what's happening on centralized exchanges is a big number, obviously. But at the same time, one of the things that we also track is how many on-chain transactions are happening on average per day with USDC. And if you look at the trailing 180 days, so the average daily transaction volume over the past 6 months is about $1.5 trillion in on-chain transaction volume. So the growth is really significant. And now we can't really sort of see what every payment is and what that transaction volume is. There's definitely still a lot that's moving capital within these markets, but there's also more and more where people are getting that utility. And again, we're in the early stages, very early stages of all of this.
That's incredible. It's extremely exciting. Thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure.
REWIRED, Jeremy, thank you so much for the insights, and enjoy the rest of which I'm sure is going to be a very exciting week.
As always. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Bye.